You know, I did my entire Divinity series, but the entire time all I was doing was really being critical, overly critical of the idea, because the entire point of it was to try to conceive of the divine, not just criticize the idea. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to try to imagine it and describe it in the best way that I know how to do. Something which can exist outside of time, space, our physical reality, but can cause it all to come into being. Who can create it, destroy it, maintain it, is the very essence of it. And this exists in the Abrahamic faiths, but also in Hinduism, which I've been looking into quite a bit lately, just out of sort of personal curiosity. And you have this idea of a being which encapsulates all knowledge, wisdom, power. It's supposed to be the sort of the pinnacle of being, but also the essence upon which everything else rests. Sort of, if you think of like the entirety of the mortal plane of our physical existence, sort of just being this testing ground for, our spirits, our souls, our real metaphysical selves, apart from this physical body, then it's sort of like whatever religion you happen to believe in, you end up having to sort of pay reverence to this higher being, because it's essentially the thing which you're striving to be yourself. You're striving to be godlike. You're striving to be like the divine, separate from physical needs, trying to be more like the ascetics, like in the case of Buddha. You're essentially trying to transcend your physical reality and achieve this sort of existence in which you are cognizant of the underlying metaphysical truths of the underlying metaphysical reality, which for theists is spiritual in nature, supernatural in nature. It's beyond what we experience on a day-to-day basis. In my thought experiment that I did by myself to try to really conceive of the divine on my own, when I was trying to really get myself to maybe even believe in it, to see if I could, what I imagined myself was sort of this being which was hard to even comprehend. Well, what I was looking at, where it was sort of this, I don't know, this transcendent ball of, not really a ball, but like this point of energy. I don't even know how to explain it, but sort of, it's almost like my mind was trying to imagine like a star existing outside of space and time. I don't even know how to describe it, and the reason why I can't describe it is because I'm not really sure what I'm describing, what I was really picturing. It was just a vague thought in my head. But I guess a big part of that experience was to try to feel it, that emotion that comes with conceiving of the divine, being in the presence of the divine, appreciating it, witnessing it in some form, or beholding it, I guess you could say. And in my little thought experiment that I did, I feel like I came really close to that, as far as my mind could stretch to try to do it. And I could see why it is that people who have what they believe to be spiritual experiences, why they come away with, a different view on life, perhaps. Maybe they're doing things like, let's say, ayahuasca or other psychedelic substances or other hallucinogenics, which are done, throughout the world, that make you see, experience, or think you're experiencing these spiritual realities, or you're transcending the mortal plane, like I said earlier. And in that moment, you're left with sort of a vague idea of what's going on, but also, your emotions are still running rampant in those situations, I imagine. So it's almost like any idea that you're having at that moment becomes sort of amplified in its meaning to you, because like, for anybody who's done THC, it's whatever you're thinking of that sort of becomes a runaway thought, that you think is the most amazing, thought ever conceived, because you're high. And so imagine that feeling, or that sort of way of thinking, coupled with, divine experiences, spiritual experiences, or even just that sort of line of thought that has to do with that, with spirituality, with divinity. And you could see yourself going on this sort of path to, I have witnessed the divine, I have knowledge now of the supernatural, the underlying truth of everything. And then sort of, you could base entire religions off of it, potentially. Or it could exist in a feedback loop of sort of confirmation bias, maybe. But for all of my sort of naysaying and all my sort of negativity, I imagine a lot of people would interpret it as being just negative. I do still admit that I don't know. And I feel like the sort of acknowledgement that you don't know is pretty important to the human experience. Thousands of years of us trying to just figure it out. Existentialism itself exists as a philosophy to try to understand meaning in what is potentially a universe which is inherently devoid of meaning, on its own, objectively. You end up having to sort of insert your own meaning in order for there to be any meaning. But anyways, I don't know, it's like before, when I was first starting out making these videos, in my last version of my YouTube channel, I was so sure that I knew everything. I was so sure that I had it figured out in terms of, philosophical debates and everything. But it's like, with age and experiences, I've come to much better appreciate the feeling of not knowing, the state of not knowing, and the feelings that come with it. And there is in it, in itself, a sort of, it humbles you. like within the acceptance of not knowing everything, you're immediately humbled because there is just so much knowledge which you don't have, things which you don't know, entire workings of the world around you that are alien to you, foreign to you, because you still haven't discovered them or come to understand them. We still don't know what's causing the expansion of the universe. We still don't know what, like, apparently the vast majority of matter in the universe is really made out of, because it turns out that the matter which makes up us only makes up a tiny fraction. So this isn't me saying that because we don't know this and that therefore there's a God. It's sort of me saying that it's okay to say that we don't know, and therefore try to discover more and learn more as much as we can. But in our state of just ignorance, we can experiment. You can dive into these deep philosophical questions. And so in that way, it's like the concept of a God, whether it's the sort of transcendent, all-encompassing Hindu gods, or the creator of the universe Christian God, or that also would be the Judaic God, and the Muslim or the Islamic God, the Abrahamic God. Whatever God you're thinking of that exists on that level, of being, at that transcendent scale, then it's still an interesting sort of concept to consider, because even if you take what I've said before about it existing outside of space and time and therefore being outside of your ability to prove it, I cannot disprove it, which I've said before, because it exists outside of space and time, which is beyond either of our capabilities to be able to verify. So it leaves room the possibility potentially for the divine. The reason why people like myself are non-believers is because we don't see a rational and worthwhile reason to say that it definitely exists. It just merely exists as maybe a possibility if we sort of relegate it to the tiniest sliver of, what may be to potentially be real but we don't know about. And so I guess in this video, I've been sort of talking about me sort of humoring that idea. The idea of the divine actually being real, that tiny sliver of what we don't know, where the divine exists, imagining that tiny sliver is in fact true. Like that tiny sliver of what we don't know happening to contain the divine within it. It's me sort of thinking, well, imagine that is the case, that tiny sliver happens to contain the divine, and what if that were true? What if that is true? And so I try to imagine it. I try to imagine what it could be, what it would feel like to be in its presence, because that's what ultimately I feel like a lot of discussions of, gods, especially personal gods, a lot of times they sort of come down to that level of how the individual feels in response to experiencing something supernatural. To go with the idea that revelation is necessarily first person, a lot of times when people are talking about their supernatural or divine experiences, it's from their subjective experience, their subjective perspective. And I'm not saying that they're lying when they're talking about their experience. I'm not lying about my experience. It's just how you interpret what you're experiencing, what sort of rationale you come up with or can justify to explain your experience. In my experience, and the one I'm describing, this was intentional by me. This was my goal in this thought experiment, to try to do it, to try to conceive of the divine. But for others, they may be going through a difficult situation and maybe already have some form of belief that's already sort of present there in sort of a seed form, I guess you could call it. Like, essentially, they already have that grain of belief, and a certain situation sort of amplifies it to the point where it becomes, like, their philosophy of life. Like, I know I've met several Christians who have described it that way to me, that they've had spiritual experiences of, like, angels and what have you. In the middle or after a traumatizing experience or a very difficult experience, and it cements or amplifies their Christian beliefs, let's say. I mean, I guess when I was experiencing it, I was going through a bit of a difficult time because I was between jobs, and it was in the middle of this pandemic, and it was a stressful time for me. And so my emotions were already heightened. So to go into this sort of thought experiment with my emotions already, heightened, of course, when I go to do this, whatever emotional response I'm going to have to this experience I'm having is going to be sort of amplified to the point of, where I'm going to feel, maybe I felt almost overwhelmed by what I was experiencing, which is what I imagine a lot of religious persons, spiritual persons feel when they have these sort of experiences. It's just that I came away with it not with a belief that any of it's real, but with the ability to sort of appreciate what these persons think they're experiencing, if that makes any sense. And so, you think about, you try to conceive of the divine. You try to think of what it actually is, or maybe not even being so like over analytical that way. Just try to conceive of it, and then be in its presence, and then try to understand it later. But that's what you have to do with any experience you don't understand. You have to try to make sense of it later on. And in this experience, I was essentially seeing light, almost like a light suspended in an empty void. This singular point of light that was brilliant beyond description. That it was true. It was still surrounded by darkness. It didn't illuminate everything, but it was the one point of light in that darkness. And, its rays were passing through me. Like, I could see them in front of me. They were passing through me. They enveloped me. And, those rays, along with all of the emotions I was feeling. And, at the time that I was doing this, I was listening to discussions on Christianity and Hinduism, different beliefs that are carried by each of those faiths. And I came, like, the following day, I felt very peaceful. I felt like kind of comforted for like days afterwards, and it was really nice. And I, kind of makes sense. You experience something which is, sort of this brilliant light, this locus of hope. Everything was centered around it. All of my fears, my dread, my anxiety could all be sort of enveloped by this thing, this divine presence, and sort of wash away because I was in its presence. And so it was sort of like I was feeling all those things, but because I was in its presence, they sort of like kind of fade away, and you're left with sort of like calm and hope. Was that the divine that did that for me? I don't think so. I think it was really just me. having a runaway thought and sort of experiencing all of the heightened emotions that come with that. Because I was trying to make this happen and nearly got there. I just didn't come away with a belief that it was real. But it was quite an experience either way. Like, I still think about it. I still feel like I approach things a little differently now after that. I feel like for me, it was probably more of a sort of eureka moment. Maybe it could be described as a sort of an epiphany on all the things that I was worried about. Because nowadays I try to take things not as, deadly serious anymore. I still suffer from anxiety. I'm still, nervousness. I still have all those things, which, let's be honest, a lot of people do, especially nowadays, especially right now, with everything that's going on. But it doesn't cripple me as much anymore. I feel a little more free. It's kind of the reason why I'm making these videos and not feeling so anxious about how they'll be perceived if anybody watches them or anything of that nature. This is just sort of me thinking into the void, or speaking into the void my innermost thoughts on this, that, and the other thing. And it was kind of inspired by that experience. Something that I came away with from that experience was, it was the acceptance of impermanence. It was the sort of oneness with everything, that I will cease to exist at some point. And so I only have this time to experience life, to enjoy life, to try things, to, act on choices which I may not be 100% sure of, but have at least thought through, sort of just taking chances, that sort of thing, and like living life. Don't hurt anybody, but also just try to live and try to live life to its fullest. And by that I mean try to enjoy every moment as much as you can, instead of living in living in a constant state of anxiety and crippling self-doubt. Because why live that way in the one life you get to live, instead of just trying to enjoy life? So this video ended up being longer than I intended it to be. Hopefully I can cut it down quite a bit, but I'm intending the next video I do, I'm debating whether or not to make it about Satanism as a sort of fun thing to talk about, or space. But I've already talked about space in my aliens video and the one with the cosmos video, so maybe this will be like a more specific, tinier video. Who knows? Who knows how that's gonna go? But yeah, this will be Conceiving of the Divine, Part 5, True Divinity. Bye.